Hi, I'm Val from Quilty Pleasures, and we're doing our next installment of My Favorite Color is Moda, which is quite a large quilt, and we're making good progress though, so I think you'll see some real results. We completed block 6, which has a whole lot of pieces in it. I counted them up once. I forget what it was. I blocked it because it was a lot of pieces in that block. But they were all the same half square triangles in a small size and a large size. Put them together. It was not difficult. So I'm sure everybody was successful with that. And we're ready to move on now to block 7. And the nice thing about blocks 7, 8, and 9 is they're all the same. So this is block 7, and it's going to be 18 and a half inches finished, I think. 18 finished. And you're going to make one of those. It's super easy. Half square triangles in the corners and rectangles on the sides and a square in the middle. Couldn't be easier. And then you're going to repeat that same pattern but in a scaled down version, and this one is going to be 13 and a half inches finished, and you're making one of those. And then you're going to make 3 more even smaller at 9 inches. Okay, so you'll have the 3 sizes of basically a cross block, but nice and easy. So that gives you kind of a break from all of the little tiny half square triangles that you just finished. Okay, and then after those 3 variations, we're going to move on to this block. I don't know the name of it, but it's kind of Navajo feeling, but again, just half square triangles and a large center square and squares in the 4 corners. And you're going to make this one in the 2 sizes as well. So there'll be one of the large ones and this time 2 of the small ones. Then we're going to start just one slight variation. You're going to do quarter square triangles, and they are different from half square triangles, and if you're a newer quilter, you may not be aware of the difference. So I'm just going to do a little demo about half square triangles versus quarter square triangles and the big difference between them and why you have to pay attention to that difference. So this is a picture of a quarter square triangle. This is a picture of a half square triangle. The size doesn't matter. The geometry is exactly the same for each. With the half square triangle, what you've been working on the whole time that we've been going along, it's just what the name says. The square is made up of 2 triangles. Each one makes a half of the square, so half square triangle. And we are talking about squares, so the corners are 90 degrees on those triangles. And there's one there. These are quarter square triangles. Same kind of idea. Each triangle is 1/4 of the finished square. And if you look at the triangle shape, it's exactly the same as the shape on the half square triangle, but there is a difference, and it's really important we have to understand this. So when you cut a piece of fabric, we have the straight of grain, which is very stable. That's the thread that runs the whole length of the bolt of fabric, and when it's on the loom, it's kind of secured at the top and at the bottom. It's very, very stable. It's held in place. The crosswise threads weave through those lengthwise threads, and that's, at the edges, that's what becomes the selvage on your fabric, where that thread turns around and it weaves back and forth. That crosswise grain, which is also the warp, has a tiny bit of stretch to it. It's not quite as stable as the lengthwise grain, but it's still pretty stable, but it has a tiny bit of stretch. But diagonally across those 2 threads, there is a lot of stretch, and that's what we call the bias. And if you're familiar with garment sewing, you know that a skirt cut on the bias will be nice and flowy and drapey and gives you a nice swing. But that's not something we want in our quilts. We want them to be stable. We don't want wavy edges or any drapiness going on. So when you cut your half square triangles, we're cutting them from a square, and when we cut from corner to corner to make that half square triangle, this edge in here, that's the bias, that's the stretchy part. And so when we're putting them together to make the finished square, like this one, we do not want bias edges along the outside. We want those bias edges contained in the middle, where they'll be controlled by these nice stable outer edges. So if I cut this guy in half and I've got those bias edges there, I want to make sure that I use that in a half square triangle. If I took that bias edge here, I don't know if you can see it here. If I cut those triangles and had all those bias edges and put them together to make a quarter square triangle like that, you can see all of my bias edges are going to be on the outside, and that's going to give me a lot of distortion in my block, and it will not be stable. It will be very difficult to piece. So when I make a quarter square triangle, I want to cut my pieces from a square in both directions. That way, these bias edges, now instead of being on the hypotenuse, remember grade 9 geometry, instead of being on the hypotenuse, it's now on these two sides, and we want to sew those into the middle where they'll be nice and controlled. Okay? If that doesn't make sense, call me. I'll go over it again. Now to sew one, we can also, this is my little example of a quarter square triangle, and the easy way to do it, rather than cutting those triangles in advance so that you have those bias edges to deal with, we're going to do the same technique that we did with the half square triangles, only we're going to kind of do it in 2 steps to make the quarter square triangle. So you've seen this demo before. This is nothing new. I'm going to make my half square triangles. I've done that. I make 2 of them. I'm going to put them together with the dark side against the light side on this one, and the light side on this one, on top of the dark side of the underneath one. And I'm going to butt my seam allowances up nice and tight. I pressed towards the dark in both cases, so that gives me a nice little nesting point where I can get in there nice and tight. And then I'm going to use my magic wand and draw my lines on either side of the center, and I'm going to sew it, and I'm going to cut it. This is exactly what we did before for the half square triangles. And now, this is the magic of me sewing it ahead of time. I've got 2 of these guys, and I can still use my triangle square up ruler to trim that down. Because these are nested nice and tight, I can put my center line along that seam line. I'm putting my 3-inch line right on my stitching line. I'm on my point there. Bingo, bango. And I'm going to cut. Take that away. And cut. And I'm going to show you how to collapse the seam. I think I showed you this once before in another video, but I'm going to show it again because it's very cool. If I just opened this up and press, I'm going to get a lump in the middle. And so I'd like to avoid that. And whenever you have a 4-patch or 4 triangles or 8 diamonds or 6 diamonds coming together, you can collapse that middle seam so that it distributes the bulk evenly, and it does make a big difference in your pressing. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just remove those little stitches that I put in, the ones that are in the seam allowance, not the seam I just sewed, but the ones that are in the seam allowance, just to release that. And then I'm putting my piece down, and I'm looking at the two halves. This half is bigger. You can see the whole thing. This one's been covered up by the seam allowance. So this is the part that I'm going to start with. And I'm just going to press lightly on top of my stitching. And I'm going to then open that up. And I'm doing this backwards, I'm right-handed. I gotta edit that because I lost. Okay, so I'm looking at my piece, and the part that I can see all of, that's the part I'm going to start with. This half has been partially covered up by my seam allowance, so the bigger one, the one I can see everything, that's where I'm going to start. And I'm going to press my stitching line just to the center very lightly. Just that kind of relaxes the fibers and the threads. And opening that up, and then I'm going to press over. Now in this case, I'm not pressing under the dark. It didn't work out that way, and that's okay. That's the way it happens sometimes. And then I'm going to close it up and turn it over, and now this side is the one that I can see everything. So I'm going to press it lightly, finger press it over. I'm just pressing to that midpoint. I'm not going any farther, and I'm not pushing with the iron. I'm not distorting anything. And then when I turn it over, look at that, the magic happens, and I get this cute little four-patch at the intersection. I'm just going to mash that with the iron, turn it over, mash it again. And I'm not pushing, I'm just pressing. And it makes a nice flat intersection. And because I trimmed it with the triangle square up ruler, all of my corners are perfect. Ta-da! So that's a quarter square triangle. That technique of collapsing the seam to distribute the bulk, you're going to use that a lot for a lot of projects throughout your quilting career. So that's a really good trick to have. Let me show. Oh yeah, this is the block that you're going to make using that technique. This is your quarter square triangle block, and that is block number 13. And you're making 3 of these. Super easy. They're nice and big, so it's easy to handle. That's 13. Now, for those of you who are keeners, you're equipped now. You can finish. All of the blocks use the same techniques, primarily half square triangles, rectangles, squares. That's the only quarter square triangle you'll have to deal with. And the next blocks are really easy. There's 9 patches, and there's a kind of a, I don't know, quarter square triangles in a square, but they're not quarter square triangles. They're actually half square triangles that are sewn together. And there's another cross. So pretty straightforward. And then at the end, you get this guy, another big one. That's sort of your grand finale. This is a 27-inch block that you end up with. This is block number 20. But there is nothing in any of the remainder that's going to be difficult. You're well equipped to handle any of it. So next time, we will be able to put them together, or I'll be able to put mine together because I've done all my blocks. So we'll look at the components of the sections next time and put them together, and you will have a finished quilt. So there you go. Happy sewing, happy quarter square triangling, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.